Hi, everyone, and welcome to What is the Big Idea for Week 2? So, this week we spent a lot of time going through chapter by chapter in the leadership book on leaders, followers, and the environment. Took one chapter for each one, talked about leaders, followers, environments, talked about different types of leaders. They talked about some specific types of followers. We'll get into all of that. And then we talked about the environment and changing environments and how that can affect kind of your leadership style. So I guess, a good question to think about as you're going through this is, if you're a good leader in one situation, are you also a good leader in another situation? Can that environment change and make a difference? The other big idea that I want to get into is self-awareness. One of the things as a developing leader, and something hopefully I want you to get out of this course is understanding self-awareness. I think this is one of the biggest either problems for managers or leaders in organizations or leaders in even in nonprofits and things like that, is that we all have blind spots, and understanding that we have these blind spots becomes a big deal in how well you are as a leader. So for an example, there's all these different types of awareness. It's kind of self-awareness and leadership assessments that you'll go through as a manager, as a leader in different organizations. There's the Myers-Briggs, Strength Finders, there's things like that. So there's this one specific one that I was able to do at a couple of different companies. So it's very interesting. It's a good way to be able to now compare results from one to the other because of what you find out. So in the first company, how it was administered is there's 100 questions, and your manager answers those 100 questions about you. You answer those 100 questions about yourself, and then each member of your team answers the same 100 questions about you. And then it's all put on a graph, and you can see kind of how your answers were. And what you look for is those wide variances. So I see myself as a 4 in this. My team sees me as a 2 on this. I see myself as a 2 on this. My manager sees me as a 4 on this. And what you do is you have those discussions, one-on-one with your manager, or a leader on one-on-one with your teams, saying, hey, this was something that I see myself doing it this way. You see me doing it that way. And again, it's anonymous. So you don't know which team member said it. So you kind of look at it all. And then there's usually a place for kind of self-type, and you kind of put some things in. So one of the things when I did this at Merck, it came up as needs to speak up more in teleconferences. I was like, I think I speak up enough. So again, this is a blind spot. And again, I ignored it originally. So then what happened is I go to Zoll, and I take a very similar one. So this one only had 50 questions. So again, manager, my director, he answered 50 questions on me. I answered 50 questions on myself. Each one of my team members answered the same 50 questions. Same sort of similar graph. Hopefully in a later episode or video, I'll find that, and I'll be able to put it up and show you kind of what it looks like. But again, goes down, seeing the variances. It was pretty close on all of them, because I feel like I'm pretty self-aware, except that again, down the bottom from my director, needs to speak up more in teleconferences. So I was like, man, this is 2 companies, 2 times doing this, same thing came up, 2 different leaders. So I said, there's something to it. So I acknowledged my blind spot. And what do you do about it? So I went out and I asked a mentor of mine, his name's Matt, and I said, hey, Matt, this is something that came up on 2 different times. I did this over, years. So, what do you think about it? So we talked about it, and he said, hey, I used to have a very similar problem. So what I did was that I gave myself a number that I had to speak up on every teleconference. And he said his number was 1 time to speak up every 20 minutes during a 1-hour teleconference. That's 3 times an hour. I was like, that's not really me. He said, listen, this is the thing. Start it. Try it once or twice. Say, you're going to give yourself 2 times to speak up on a teleconference. I said, all right, I'll start there. And what I found was it became much easier to speak up on the teleconference. But I also discussed it with somebody on my team. I said, well, you know me. Why do you think this would come up in a couple of different places? So again, acknowledging it, looking for other input. And this person had another unique perspective, and they said, hey, when do you get the agenda for these teleconferences? And interesting enough, both directors sent the agenda about 5 minutes before the teleconference. And he said, well, maybe that's your problem. Maybe what you're doing is you're overanalyzing it. And it was, and that's what I found out, is that I was overanalyzing these agendas. And the teleconference was already going on. So I had to ask the director, so the director I was working for at the time, I said, hey, can we do something? Can we have either the agenda early, or even more, can I help with the agenda? Can I help put it together? You let me know what you want to talk about. I'll find out from the other people in the team what they need to talk about, so that we're all prepared, and then I'll have it. And I explained to him, this is why, is that this has come up and I want to get better at it. So he acknowledged it, and he said, no, you know what, I'll send it out earlier. So he would send it out at 8:30. Guess what? I was ready for my teleconferences in the morning, and good to go. So again, finding the mentors and the people to talk to, acknowledging the blind spot, helped me become more self-aware. So this is just a, kind of a graphic of different things between becoming self-aware and kind of what that is. And this comes from the Center for Creative Leadership. Great website if you ever want to go to it. A lot of tools, things like that to help you become a better leader. One of the things that comes up in self-awareness is identity versus reputation, right? So they're different. So if you look at the picture on the left, that older gentleman, he's looking in the mirror and he's seeing a young guy in there, right? That's his identity. He still feels young. Reputation is the picture on the right, what everybody else thinks of you. So one of the things is, can you change identity and can you change reputation? So you can change the way you think of yourself. It's really hard. Reputation is something that you can either change or go into a situation knowing, kind of what you want it to be and how you can affect that. So an example of that is when I was first wanting to become a manager, I was kind of a peer leader on a team with somebody else. We were specialists on this team, and her name was Hillary. And before they put us together, we went and we had lunch. And one of the things I told her, I said, listen, I just got my MBA. I want to start moving on to become a manager. So, I want to make sure that we work together and we both get what we want. So I said, as also one of the specialists on this team, what do you want to do next? Yeah, do you want to be a manager? And she's like, no, I want to be it's what's called a health science, so much more scientific person, taking on much more scientific roles within the company. I was like, oh, that's great. So what we did is we came up with this idea where any business question, business planning, analysis, things like that would go through me. And anything that had to do with the sciences, key opinion leaders, what they're thinking, or studies, how, what those look like, that would all go through her. So we use peer speakers out in the community. She would be in charge of working with all of them. So that really worked out well, right? So we were able to decide what our reputation was before going on to this team. So then what ended up happening is I became a manager, and she's one of the top oncology specialty representatives in not just in Merck, but she gets job offers all the time from different companies because they want to bring her experience and reputation onto their team. So it is something you can plan on, and it's something that you can kind of put out there. And so it was interesting because when I became a manager, I was managing this team that I was kind of a peer leader for, and then I became the manager for, right? So I had a reputation on that team as, hey, this is where the strengths are. And then I had to quickly go on, as becoming the manager, I had to also show that I had this other side too. So, kind of that reputation had to change a little bit of, he's not just the business guy, but he also understands the science behind what we do. So again, reputation versus identity. So how others see me, right? So they see me as a scaredy cat. I see myself as the tiger. So just kind of how people think of you. Another topic that came up, and I really liked this graphic. So this is, in chapter 4, it's the first graphic right there on becoming a leader. It's all the sort of things that go into, you don't just be handed the leadership. That would be great if it happened, but it's ability, personality, and opportunity. Those three things have to become a successful leader, and you want to make sure all of those are balanced. So, kind of ability is kind of your cultural influences, as well as your, what they call evolutionary influences. So jobs that you've done before, things like that, other roles, what roles have you taken on, schooling, how have you kind of prepared yourself to become that leader. personality comes from your childhood influences, also organizational industry characteristics. So think of that special terminology that you learn if you're an accountant or something like that. You're learning all these specific terms and these specific ways of doing things. That all comes and goes into your personality, like, oh, they're really good at this and things like that. And then that overarching thing is what's that opportunity look like, right? So opportunity is much more than just being in the right place at the right time, right? It's being prepared for that. So there's a whole thing, you hear people say, oh man, that person was lucky to get that job. No, it's not luck. Luck is being prepared for that opportunity. So how do you prepare for these experiences and getting ready for it, right? So formal schooling, what you're doing now, right? Finishing, doing, getting a college degree. That gives you a little bit kind of that upper leg. You're learning new theories, and you're learning ways people are thinking about things from other points of view. So on the job experience, that's great, especially in some of those real technical skills. To be a master plumber, to be a master electrician, you have to master those skills. To be a good leader in there, you have to know those skills, as well as you have to understand maybe if you're going to run your own electric company, you're going to need electrician company. You're going to need to have that formal schooling of kind of maybe a basic accounting class of how to do the books and things like that. So again, part of it come from on the job, but understanding that is a little bit more of the schooling or codes and things like that. Then travel and exposure to different cultures. So if you're only in one area, you're only getting exposed to one thing. So we're in Rhode Island. So if you're only in Rhode Island, you're not being exposed to that broader sense of things. So the more you can be a broader sense and going out there and learning from different people and how different people interact and how different people think, that makes you that much more kind of important to the company. The networking and mentoring, exposure to the top. So I'll take a little bit of each one of these. So networking within your company, as well as networking outside of your company, maybe in your industry. So I mentioned Matt as somebody earlier who, mentor of mine, who I reached out to, and he's a huge believer in networking. And his thing on networking is not what can this person do for me, but what can I do for this person? So he's constantly building his network. I get a text from him probably once a week saying, hey, what's your LinkedIn network look like? He's big on that. We used to, when he was my manager, we'd be in the car and he'd be saying, hey, how many people have you connected to this week within the industry, things like that. He wanted me to be well connected. Well, I'll say it, when I was laid off from Merck, I got the new job at Zoll within a month because of, again, the connections that I had. Hey, I'm looking for an opportunity. Does anybody have one? All of a sudden, this person said, hey, this recruiter is looking for somebody for this company. I think you'd be a great fit. Put it together, and then boom. And then, mentoring. So either informal, formal mentors, mentoring yourself. I have mentors in the company that I work for now, who I reach out to with specific questions and have talks with. I will say, and that this goes with the exposure to the top, is, for me to get to that next level, I had that discussion with my new director this week, and we talked about, hey, what do I want to do in the future? What's that next step for me look like? And how do we get in touch with somebody either in that role or somebody who'd be hiring that role and have more discussions? So that's an interesting part of it. And then that kind of that exposure to the top. So when I graduated from college, the first job that I took was with Apex Department Stores. The reason I took that job, one of the main reasons, because I was getting offers from other, small or bigger retailers. But this one, the reason I went there was the store manager at the time said, listen, we're a small company. I have the CEO coming in once a week. What I'm going to do is give you 2 hours a month with the CEO. You're going to be able to sit down, talk to them about your career, where you want to go. And he was a really good driving opportunity. It was a great opportunity for me, right? So for me, taking that job in that smaller company, allowed me to get this exposure to the top within this company, not one that I went on to, but the way that this guy was thinking, and the, kind of some of the tools that he gave me, he helped me coach. I would sit there and say, hey, I'm trying to coach my team to do this, and he would sit there and, again, as a CEO, go all the way back to his first steps and give me stories of when he was working in his uncle's store when he was 11 years old, and it was awesome. So just kind of that exposure to it, and looking for those opportunities to do that sort of thing. Another topic that came up within the context of the readings this week were the types of followers, right? So they specifically talked about 4 different types of followers. So we have these followers every day that either are given to your team, they're either on your team, you're a follower to somebody else's team, because that's the way that the corporate structure is, or there's informal and formal followers, right? So you might follow somebody informally, just as somebody within an organization. But they talk about these specific 4, and I wanted to just talk about them a little bit more. So top managers, so includes a small group most influential in the organization, like the CEO, president, VPs, things like that. So if you remember when we were talking about the leadership pyramid last week, and then I put one upside down and talked about kind of that accountability at the top. That's where the second thing, that the debate stems from where the top management team is solely responsible. Well, they're responsible for the vision and kind of the direction that company's taking, because that's what they're doing. The smaller people in the organization, as you go down that, they're much more responsible for that day-to-day performance of what's happening, how we executing that strategy. And I see that a lot within these big companies where they set the strategy and then they're worried that it's not being pulled all the way down. So I remember I had a vice president who used to say, it's the strategy or the execution, it's never both. So when he was sitting down with groups, he was trying to identify as the leader of, is the strategy wrong or is the execution wrong? And if the strategy's wrong, you gotta change that from within either the higher ups or the marketing, depending on how the company is set, or is it the execution? Is it the day-to-day people? I will tell you it's something that stuck with me. And as I take over teams and as I do things, that's one of the things that I think of. Is this person's strategy for their territory wrong, or are they not executing it? And a lot of times it's finding kind of where that balance is. Also, sometimes as a top manager, so again, that's a manager within my little area. I also did some work with a nonprofit, the Bristol Warren Education Foundation, where I was the finance chair. And one of the things, I had somebody come to me who said, I want to create a scholarship, and I'd love this to be a self-funding scholarship down the road. How do we do that? Right. So just came to me with a problem, and then trying to figure out how we put that together. And then can we execute it? So we put the plan together. I left, but we left them after a couple of years, but with definite plans of how they can do this. So my plans were able to be pulled through. So the next person who took my role was able to see, hey, this is the executable plan. Now, priorities might change, things might change. The world, as we know right now with the pandemic, it's changed. So their priorities might switch, or it might get put on hold or something like that. But there was a plan. So the plan comes from the top, the strategy. How it's executed is coming through from another group of people within the company. So you have to think that through. Is it strategy or execution, and where is the problem falling if it's not, or where is it success, right? So you can have a really good people who can execute really well, and they might be able to save a bad strategy. But it's one of those things that but bad execution doesn't matter if it's the greatest strategy in the world. If you can't execute it, it's never going to be successful. Another group of people that they talked about were the creative professionals, right? So these are the people on the teams, and they gave some examples: hospitals, symphonies, universities, where again, as somebody who's leading it, so think of the conductor at a symphony, being able to lead the symphony, right? He might be able to play each instrument, or he or she at least knows in their ear what it should sound like, but they're not the experts on it. I also think, IT professionals are people who, a lot of teams are creative, sometimes in the creatives and marketing, the people who are the artistic people who are putting layouts and things together. A lot of times the loyalty is more to their profession than it is to the organization, right? So they feel a real sense. You see that sometimes in hospitals with the doctors. They might really believe in a certain organization that's outside of the hospital, but they still work for the hospital. So as the person who's running the hospital, if you're in healthcare management, you're trying to run this hospital where you're like, hey, this is the best way, this is how we can help these people, but it might come in conflict with the bigger organizations, like that are outside those doctors organizations and nurses organizations. Same thing with universities. All those are good examples of there's people within there that might want to do things differently, and they feel a sense of loyalty different than the company. Just understanding that and how do you work that together is an important part. Virtual teams, we're seeing much more of this now, and these teams work across geographic distances, time zones, cultures. We're leveraging technology during this time where a lot of my team are off. We're having meetings, daily or weekly through, the Zoom technologies where we can at least still see each other. We can share things. We can talk about things. I'll tell you, I just did a workshop with my team just this last week, and I was able to use Zoom to do virtual conference rooms, and had a main conference room, then breakout rooms that people could go to. They could work on stuff and come back. It was great. I actually think it was better than when we're in a bigger group and we're trying to do this at a table where we're moving people around and it's just not working. This way, I could assign these people. Okay, I want this person to work together on this, and I want these two people to work together on this, and then they could come back. So, kind of thinking about that. But there's time zone differences, different cultures, how people work together. There's a lot of communication differences. Here's some of the issues, right? So how are they going to communicate? Are we going to use Zoom? We're going to use email. What's that sound like? As the leader, what's that FaceTime look like, right? How do I get in front of these people? Right now, as my team is home, how do I work with them being home, but still work with them and try to help them get them to that next step? Cultural differences that can cause tensions, right? So you might have some different cultures that don't interact with one another really well, or it could be male dominated culture and women on the team and not seeing that respect, right? So how do you work with that? And empathy and assertiveness. How do you show empathy in an email? Or how can you be more assertive in an email? How can it be taken incorrectly? So kind of thinking that stuff through. So if you're running a virtual team, how are you going to communicate? I think is that kind of that number one thing. And then how do you have that one-on-one time with each one of your people? Because again, there's much more than just getting the job done, right? It's getting to know the people, getting to know that there's issues at home, there's issues at work, there's all these sort of things that when I'm out in the field a couple times a month with my team, we can spend that time over lunch having those discussions. So this is something right now that I'm working a lot on, is trying to figure out how do we do better as a virtual team. Susceptible followers, we're going to do much more of this next week, but just something to kind of go into. These are followers maybe seeking unmet basic needs, have low maturity, ambitions, share worldwide views of toxic leaders. So this really gets into the kind of the toxic leader and environment. We'll spend much more time on this next week, but just wanted to say that there is this group of people that you have to give kind of thought to. And then, just bringing it all in, we talked about leader, some differences. We talked about followers, and then the environment. Can leaders be successful if the environment changes? And I love the Shackleton example that's in the book. And so once they got stranded in Antarctica and they knew they had to get to that substation, getting across all that thing, that took a totally different bunch of skill sets. He was a captain of a boat. He wasn't thinking through, how do I get people across this frozen continent? So, can people change? Yes, sometimes it's for the better, sometimes it's for the worse, right? So this is just something I like to talk about the culture and the environment of teams, right? So there's an internal team culture. That's something that you can control as the leader. You're controlling that internal team culture. There's a culture of an organization, right? So what is the organization? What does their, again, reputation, identity look like? Culture of the industry. How is your industry? Think of people who think bad things about certain industries. I was in the pharmaceutical industry for a long time. There's a group of people, presidential candidates, who hated the pharmaceutical industry, right? But I see that all the good that they do. I see it now in medical devices, the good that we do, the people that we save. When I get a save report and somebody who was saved by the device that we use, I love that. So kind of just talking through those two bottom ones. So the Jason question, when I was interviewing for Zoll, I had to interview with everybody in the organization, and I was sitting with the CEO of our local Life Vest, and his name's Jason, and we're in his office, and his first question is, listen, you've been with the same organization for 2 decades. How are you going to fold into the culture of our organization? If you ask me, still one of the best questions I've ever got in an interview. I actually told him this last year. We were at a meeting, we were having a beer, and I talked to him about this, and I said, I thought this was a great question because it made me really think about everything that I teach in leadership. And what I told him is I can control my team culture. I can't control the culture of the organization or the culture of the industry. That's the culture of the organization. That comes from you. So good or bad, that comes down from you. What I can do is I can control my team culture, what our team is going to be, what my team is going to look like, how my team's going to interact, or what they're going to be. And I also told him that's something that's ever changing. So, for example, this year, because we are a fiscal year, so we just started it. I told my team we are going to be known as the best kind of that we're going to know our product inside and out. We're going to execute flawlessly this year, and that's really where I have my team. And a lot of the things that I send out is talking about flawless execution. How are we going to execute, especially in this time? Again, we're doing a lot of our stuff virtually. How are we going to solve these problems? So one of the things, again, fitting a patient, we did a virtual one, right? So I had somebody who does it, who's very computer savvy, north of Boston in Andover, fitting somebody who is south of Boston. But the technical, how do we get the device to them, right? How do we get the paperwork afterwards? Can we take photos? Can we do this? Can we do that? So we had to solve this problem. My internal team, we solved it. We solved it before anybody else in our whole area. I remember putting it out there on email, say, hey, we just did our first virtual fit. And I had everybody in the organization, in my area calling me saying, how did you get that done? We hit this problem. We hit this problem. We hit this problem. My team culture is we solve these problems. So Monday morning motivation, it's interesting. When I took over leader at Merck, I used to do this thing called Monday morning motivation. I would send out a little motivational quote, a little story, kind of how it relates to our business. And it was just a way, these people knew me. So this was just a way to get them to know me on a different level, what my thoughts were on leadership and how our organization was going, stuff like that. Widely successful. Everybody, it was one of those things that I would get text back right away, like, hey, I love that. It would be passed along to other teams and things like that. It was great. So I come over to Zoll and I think, I'm going to do Monday morning motivation. It worked great. I did my first one, heard nothing back. Did another one, nothing back. Sent a third one, and I got a message back from someone on the team going, can you not send me these? These just don't really mean anything to me. And I was like, this is a different culture, and we have a different culture on this team, and I need to change. I had to identify what the culture was, and then I had to change it. So I don't do it anymore. Do I still send quotes and stories and things like that? Yep. But I embed them. Usually we have a Monday morning meeting, and I embed that a lot into those meetings. And and a lot of it comes from stuff that we do here. I find people who I really like, something that they've done, and I put it into a discussion. So it just becomes part of it. So it's not an email, it's live, right? So and again, people like it again. So it's just sometimes the idea isn't wrong. It just might not. If the idea isn't wrong, it just might not be the right time for it. So thinking through how we can do that. A couple other things. So, this is Simon Sinek. You're going to watch a video on Start With Why. Love this video. It's one of my favorites. I still think it's one of the best ones for becoming a leader, is understanding why companies are successful. But think of it as a leader. If you start with why every time, this is why we're doing it. This is why we're doing it, not how or what. This is not what we're going to do, right? That sounds, even just in how, this is how we're going to do this. Right? Sounds different than, hey, this is why we're going to do it. As I said, I'm the identity of my team is I want problem solvers who can solve issues and do things that other people can't do, because we're going to come up with a reason how or what we're doing. But I got to give them the why. So I utilize this a lot, where I really think through what that why looks like. The other one is unthinkable leadership. So you're going to listen to a story about Joseph Obalask, right? So this is his book. It's called 400 Letters from My Mother. He does a thing on unthinkable leadership. It is a great story. When watching that, what I want you to think about is leader follow environment, right? So he's a leader. He's also a follower, and that environment changes. As you go through this, think of who the different leaders are, who the different followers are, and how that environment changes and how it changes different people within it. I think it's a really great story. How he becomes a leader in different places where he might not have thought that he was a leader in the first place. And I always wanted to read his book. I always had trouble finding it. He's Dutch, so it was out of print a lot. So I finally found it. That's this one. And interestingly enough, I had to get it at a used book on Amazon, but it had it's a signed copy. So to me, that was very cool. So I thought it was very cool that I was able to find a signed copy of it in the book. The book is really good too. So and the last thing you're going to listen to, it's a little bit longer, and I apologize for it being long, but I think it's really good. So her name is Susan Enquist. It's a really good story of her thought and her development as a leader. So really, take this in, because there's a lot of good stuff. Think through how she, the different ways of how she moves on from failure, right? So she's a sports. She was softball, and kind of how she coaches her team to get over disappointments and over things like that. So I think it's really good how it'll all come together, and you kind of, again, think of the different leaders, the followers, the environments. Think of all that through as you're listening to her too. And that's it for this week. So hopefully that's a good overview. Leave questions in the end, and I'll make sure that I highlight some of the stuff next week. All right, have a great week.